The massive chamber floated in the darkness of space, a perfect sphere of metal and crystal that orbited the star Arcturus. Inside, representatives from 247 different species sat in their designated sections. Some breathed oxygen, others methane, and a few existed as pure energy contained within special fields. The Galactic Council met once every standard year, and today they gathered to discuss treaties and laws that govern the peaceful coexistence of all member worlds. Commander Dae-hyun Park stood at the human delegation's platform, a small circular disk that hovered near the outer edge of the chamber. Next to him, Ambassador Ji-woo Kim reviewed the notes on her datapad one more time. They had prepared for weeks, hoping to present Earth's case for reducing some of the restrictions placed on human activities. After 50 years of faithful service to the Council, they believed it was time for humanity to be treated as full equals. The chamber's lights dimmed as Council Prime Veltharis entered through the central portal. The ancient insectoid leader was over 300 years old, with a chitinous exoskeleton that gleamed like polished bronze. His 4 eyes swept across the assembled delegates before he settled onto his elevated throne at the chamber's center. The meeting began with routine matters: trade disputes between the Feln and the Mordak, mining rights near the Crab Nebula, and updates on scientific exchanges. 2 hours into the session, Veltharis announced the main agenda item. A new proposal called the Safety Protocols had been drafted by the Council's Security Committee. As Veltharis read the terms, Dae-hyun felt his stomach tighten. Every single clause targeted Earth specifically. Human ships would be required to carry Council observers on all voyages. Human colonies could no longer expand beyond their current borders. Earth's military forces would be reduced by 60%. Most shocking of all, mining and resource extraction rights in the Sol system would be transferred to Council oversight. Ji-woo stepped forward, her voice steady despite her rising anger. She activated the translation field and began to speak. She reminded the Council that humanity had never broken a treaty in 50 years. Earth had contributed more aid to developing worlds than any 3 other species combined. Human scientists had shared every discovery without reservation. Human ships had defended Council space against pirates and raiders, losing thousands of lives in the process. What justification existed for these harsh new restrictions? The chamber remained silent for a moment. Then someone laughed. A delegate from the Rexian sector made a clicking sound that the translators rendered as mocking laughter. Within seconds, dozens of other delegates joined in. The sound filled the massive chamber, echoing off the crystalline walls. Dae-hyun watched in disbelief as species after species expressed their amusement at Ji-woo's objections. A tall reptilian counselor from the Thek system stood and requested permission to speak. Veltharis granted it with a wave of one crystalline claw. The reptilian's words cut through the laughter. Humans were a young species with a violent history, he said. Their homeworld had nearly destroyed itself in nuclear fire just 2 centuries ago. They fought endless wars among themselves for resources and territory. Only the Council's guidance had prevented Earth from becoming a threat to galactic peace. These new protocols were not punishment but protection. Protection for humanity and protection from humanity. Other voices joined in, each adding their own reasons why the restrictions made sense. The Kelphite delegate mentioned human unpredictability. The Dravian representative spoke about human territorial aggression. A counselor from the Murdan system referenced old Earth history, listing wars and genocides that occurred before first contact. Each speaker painted humanity as barely civilized barbarians who needed constant supervision. Ji-woo tried to respond, but Veltharis cut her off. The discussion period had ended, he announced. It was time to vote. The chamber's voting crystals activated, each delegate's platform glowing with their choice. The massive display above Veltharis showed the results in real time. 246 votes in favor, 1 vote against. Only Earth had rejected the safety protocols. Veltharis declared the measure passed and immediately enforceable. Human vessels in Council space had 72 hours to report to the nearest station for installation of oversight systems. Earth's government had 1 standard month to submit plans for military reduction. Mining operations in the Sol system would halt immediately pending Council inspection and transfer procedures. Dae-hyun requested permission to make a final statement. Veltharis seemed annoyed but allowed it, warning the human commander to be brief. Dae-hyun looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of as many delegates as he could. He spoke slowly and clearly. Earth had come to this council in good faith 50 years ago. Humanity had believed in the promise of peaceful cooperation among equals. They had followed every rule, honored every agreement, and contributed far more than was required. If the council truly saw humans as nothing more than violent children who needed control, then perhaps it was time to reconsider Earth's membership in this organization. The chamber erupted in more laughter. Several delegates made dismissive gestures. One shouted that humanity should be grateful for the opportunity to exist under council protection. Another suggested that if Earth wished to leave, good riddance to troublesome primitives. Beltheris restored order and formally closed the session. The platform carrying Daehyun and Jiwoo descended toward the exit portal as celebration broke out among the other delegates. In the small transport vessel that carried them back to their ship, Jiwoo sat in stunned silence. Tears of frustration and rage streaked down her face. 50 years of work, of building relationships, of proving humanity's worth. All destroyed in a single session. Daehyun placed a hand on her shoulder but said nothing. What could he say? They had both witnessed the truth. The council would never see humans as equals. To them, Earth would always be the barbaric newcomer that needed to be controlled and contained. As their transport docked with the human diplomatic vessel, Daehyun pulled out a secured communicator. He entered a complex encryption code and waited for the connection to establish. When the green light appeared, he spoke 4 words into the device. Execute Protocol Phoenix immediately. The response came back in seconds. A simple acknowledgement that his message had been received and understood. Jiwoo looked at him with confusion. Protocol Phoenix was not something she recognized from any diplomatic manual. Daehyun met her gaze, and for the first time that day he smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. It was the smile of someone who had been pushed too far and was finally ready to push back. He told her not to worry. The council thought they knew humanity. They thought they understood what humans were capable of. Very soon they would learn exactly how wrong they had been. Deep beneath the surface of Ceres, the largest asteroid in Earth's belt, Admiral Hyejin Choi stood in a command center that officially did not exist. Hundreds of officers worked at stations arranged in concentric circles around a massive holographic display. The display showed the positions of every human asset in the galaxy, both the ones the council knew about and the ones they did not. When Daehyun's encrypted message arrived, Hyejin had been expecting it. She had been waiting 50 years for this moment. She touched a control on her command chair and the entire facility went to alert status. Red lights pulsed through corridors that stretched for kilometers beneath the asteroid's surface. In a dozen other hidden locations across the solar system, similar alerts activated. On Europa, beneath the ice, shipyards that had operated in secret for decades began final preparations. In the Kuiper Belt, weapons platforms that masqueraded as research stations came online. On Mars, in caverns deep below Olympus Mons, armies of automated factories increased production to maximum capacity. Dr. Minho Lee entered the command center carrying a data tablet. He was Earth's top expert on alien technology, and for 30 years he had led a team of scientists in reverse engineering every piece of council tech they could acquire. He informed Hyejin that all systems showed green across the board. The ships were ready. The weapons were ready. More importantly, their technological advantages were ready to be revealed. Minho explained what his teams had accomplished, while the council believed humans were simple and primitive. They had taken council FTL drive technology and improved it by 40%. They had studied alien weapons and created versions that fired faster and hit harder. They had analyzed council shields and developed counters that could penetrate them. Most importantly, they had pursued research the council had abandoned as too dangerous. Gravity manipulation, neural interface systems, and quantum entanglement communication that could not be intercepted. In orbit around Neptune, Captain Somin Kang prepared her special operations teams for deployment. Her orders were clear. Every human citizen currently on alien worlds needed to be extracted within 48 hours. The operation would require precision timing and perfect execution. Somin reviewed the lists of targets. Human scientists working in alien laboratories, human teachers at intercultural schools, human merchants and traders on distant stations, even human tourists who happened to be visiting council worlds. All of them would be brought home, whether they understood why or not. Intelligence Director Yuna Han sat in her office on Earth, watching multiple screens that showed communications intercepts from across the galaxy. Her network of agents and informants had spent decades embedding themselves in alien governments, corporations, and military organizations. The Council thought they were monitoring Earth. They had no idea that Earth was monitoring them 10 times as effectively. Una knew the schedules of every major fleet, the locations of every important facility, and the weaknesses of every significant power structure. She compiled a report that would shock Earth's government if they had not already been briefed. Humans had become indispensable to galactic civilization in ways the Council did not even recognize. Human engineers maintained 70% of the communication network because they were better at it than anyone else. Human doctors staffed major medical facilities because their training was more comprehensive. Human merchants controlled vast portions of galactic trade because they understood logistics better than species who had been spacefaring for millennia. The Council had thought they were containing Earth. In reality, they had become dependent on human expertise. The Earth government met in emergency session. The president, the military chiefs, and the heads of every major agency gathered in a bunker beneath Geneva. They reviewed the intelligence reports and listened to Admiral Yejin's assessment. The question before them was simple but profound. After 50 years of trying to work within the Council system, was Earth ready to walk away? Was humanity prepared to face the consequences of defying the most powerful alliance in the known galaxy? The vote was unanimous. Earth would issue an ultimatum. The Council had 24 hours to rescind the safety protocols and issue a formal apology. If they refused, humanity would withdraw from every treaty, every agreement, and every cooperative venture. Earth would demonstrate that it did not need the Council, but the Council desperately needed Earth. The message went out on all official channels. Within an hour, responses began arriving. Most were dismissive or mocking. A few expressed confusion. None took the threat seriously. The Vrexian ambassador sent a message that called the ultimatum childish tantrum throwing. The Kelphite delegate suggested Earth should be expelled from the Council entirely for such disrespectful behavior. Even species that had maintained friendly relations with humanity seemed bewildered by Earth's sudden aggressive stance. On alien news networks, commentators discussed the situation with barely concealed amusement. Human civilization comprised a single star system and a handful of minor colonies. They had a military force limited by treaty to defensive operations only. Their technology, while adequate, lagged behind Council standards in most areas. The idea that Earth could threaten the combined might of 246 advanced civilizations seemed absurd. Several military analysts predicted that if Earth continued its belligerent attitude, a Council fleet could occupy the Sol system within a week with minimal resistance. As the 24-hour deadline approached, no formal response came from the Council. Veltharis issued a brief statement saying that Earth's ultimatum did not warrant official consideration. The safety protocols would proceed as planned. Human vessels that did not comply would be seized. Human colonies that resisted Council oversight would face economic sanctions. The matter was closed. Admiral Yejin received authorization to proceed. She input her command codes and watched as confirmation signals lit up across her display. In a dozen hidden locations, massive hangar doors opened to space. Ships that had been concealed for decades emerged into the light. Not hundreds of ships, not even thousands. Over 10,000 warships of various classes activated their drives and began moving toward pre-assigned positions across the galaxy. At the same moment, human facilities throughout Council space went dark. Communication relay stations stopped functioning. Medical centers closed their doors. Trade ships docked at the nearest stations and refused to depart. Human engineers walked off their jobs maintaining alien infrastructure. Human teachers left their classrooms. Human merchants froze all transactions. In a single coordinated moment, humanity stopped cooperating with the galactic civilization that had just voted to further restrict their freedom. On Earth, people watched the news feeds with mixed emotions. Some felt pride that their world was finally standing up for itself. Others felt fear about the certain retaliation that would come. Most simply felt relief that the pretense was over. For 50 years, humanity had tried to be the perfect junior partner, always following the rules, always deferring to older civilizations. That patience had earned them nothing but contempt. Now it was time to show the galaxy what humans could really do when they stopped being polite. Daehyun and Jiwoo returned to Earth just as the deadline expired. They stood in the command center next to Admiral Hyejin and watched the holographic display update in real time. Green markers representing human ships appeared throughout the galaxy, in positions the Council had never known existed. Red markers showing Council facilities began blinking as their systems failed without human maintenance. The web of dependencies that Yuna's intelligence had mapped out was becoming visible to everyone. Jiwoo asked Hyejin how long humanity had been planning this. The Admiral smiled and told her the truth. From the very first day Earth joined the Council, from the moment they realized the treaty they were signing was designed to limit human potential rather than foster genuine cooperation, they had begun preparing. Every restriction the Council placed on Earth had been followed to the letter publicly, while being completely circumvented secretly. The Council had created their own worst nightmare by underestimating human ingenuity and determination. The galaxy was about to learn a hard lesson about the dangers of disrespecting those you consider beneath you. The first system to fail was the communication network. The Galactic Council maintained thousands of relay stations that allowed instant messaging across vast distances. These stations required constant maintenance and adjustment to account for stellar drift and cosmic interference. For decades, human engineers had performed most of this work because they had a natural talent for troubleshooting complex systems. When those engineers walked away from their posts, the network began to degrade within hours. On the planet Rex Prime, the government tried to contact their colonial administrators on 3 separate worlds. The messages never arrived. They assumed it was a temporary glitch and sent a repair team to the nearest relay station. What they found shocked them. The station was operating, but its calibration was slowly drifting out of alignment. The Vrexian engineers examined the systems and realized they did not actually understand how the humans had optimized the network. The original Council designs were functional but inefficient. Humans had implemented improvements that no one had bothered to document or learn. Similar discoveries happened across the galaxy. The Kelphite Banking Consortium tried to process the day's transactions and found their systems frozen. Human financial experts had built the software that managed currency exchanges between different species. Without them, the complex calculations that kept galactic commerce running simply stopped working. Merchants could not transfer funds. Governments could not pay their employees. The entire economic infrastructure ground to a halt. Engineer Jinwoo Seo had spent 15 years working on Thek's Station, a massive trading hub that hosted representatives from over 100 species. He had maintained the station's environmental systems, ensuring that each section had the correct atmosphere, temperature, and gravity for its inhabitants. When the order came to withdraw, he gathered his team of 30 human engineers and departed on the next transport. Within 2 days, the station's environmental controls began malfunctioning. Oxygen levels dropped in some sections. Gravity fluctuated wildly in others. The Thek's administrators brought in their own engineers, but they could not figure out what was wrong. The problem was that Jinwoo had not sabotaged anything. He had simply stopped fixing the thousands of small problems that occurred naturally in such a complex system. The Thek's engineers had relied on humans for so long that they had forgotten how to maintain their own technology. All across the galaxy, this same pattern repeated, not because humans had done anything malicious, but because they had stopped doing everything helpful. Counselor Thexnar watched his homeworld's situation deteriorate and began to feel genuine fear. He reviewed intelligence reports that painted a disturbing picture. Human merchants had not just transported goods, they had optimized trade routes to maximize efficiency. Human doctors had not just treated patients, they had introduced medical techniques that alien physicians now depended on. Human teachers had not just educated alien children, they had developed curriculum improvements that entire school systems had adopted. The Council had allowed humans to become integrated into every aspect of galactic life, never realizing how much they were learning to depend on them. On Earth, Captain Soman Kang reported that the extraction operations were 95% complete. Her teams had successfully retrieved over 200,000 human civilians from alien worlds. A few had refused to leave, believing this crisis would blow over quickly. Soman had given them a choice: come home now or be on your own when things got worse. Most changed their minds when she showed them classified intelligence about what was likely to happen next. The refugee ships arrived at Earth and its colonies carrying people who were confused and frightened. Many had built lives on alien worlds and resented being forced to abandon them. The government set up reception centers and tried to explain the situation. Earth could no longer trust the Council to treat humans fairly. The safety protocols had been the final insult in a long history of discrimination. Humanity was taking a stand, and that meant all humans needed to be in human-controlled space where they would be safe from retaliation. Merchant Seojun Oh had operated a shipping company for 20 years, transporting everything from medical supplies to industrial equipment across 12 sectors. His fleet of 40 cargo ships had earned him a fortune and respect from traders of many species. When the withdrawal order came, he gathered his captains and explained their new mission. They would continue operating, but only within human space and only for human customers. Several captains protested, saying they had contracts and obligations to alien clients. Seojun told them the truth they had been hiding. Human merchants did not just move cargo efficiently. They controlled the supply chains for dozens of critical resources. Rare earth elements needed for advanced electronics, medical isotopes used in alien healthcare, specialized foods that some species could only digest in certain forms. Humans had quietly positioned themselves as middlemen in countless essential industries. When they stopped trading with Council worlds, shortages would begin almost immediately. It was not an act of war. It was simply the natural consequence of cutting off trade relationships. Within a week, panic began to spread on several worlds. On the Dravian homeworld, hospitals ran out of a critical medicine that human companies had produced. Dravian biochemists tried to replicate the formula, but it had taken human researchers decades to perfect. On the mining world of Kelf 7, industrial operations shut down because human-made drilling equipment broke and no replacements were available. On Mirdan, schools closed because the educational software, developed by human programmers, stopped receiving updates and became incompatible with local systems. The Council called an emergency session. Veltharis demanded answers from his security committee. How had Earth become so integrated into galactic civilization without anyone noticing? The committee had no good response. They had monitored Earth's military capabilities obsessively, but paid little attention to economic and civilian activities. Humans had seemed harmless, eager to help and participate. No one had considered that this helpfulness might give Earth leverage. Intelligence Director Yuna Han watched the Council session through her network of informants and allowed herself a small smile. The Council was finally starting to understand their situation. For 50 years, humanity had played the role of helpful newcomers, always volunteering for the difficult jobs, always going above and beyond requirements. The Council had seen this as proof of human inferiority, evidence that Earth was desperate for approval. They had not realized it was a strategic choice. Humans had deliberately made themselves useful in critical areas. They had taken jobs that other species found boring or difficult. They had mastered skills that others neglected. They had built relationships and dependencies while appearing harmless and eager to please. It was not a conscious conspiracy, but rather the natural result of being underestimated. When people think you are not a threat, they let you get close. They let you into their systems. They trust you with important work. And then one day they discover you are not weak at all. You were just patient. Counselor Thexnar made a formal proposal. Reopen negotiations with Earth immediately. Several other counselors supported him, species that were suffering most from the human withdrawal, but many others opposed the idea. The Vrexians argued that giving in to Earth's demands would set a terrible precedent. Other species would think they could threaten the Council and get their way. The Mordak delegation insisted that Earth was bluffing and would be forced to return when their own economy collapsed without access to Council markets. Veltharis found himself in an impossible position. If he negotiated, he would appear weak. If he refused, the crisis would continue to worsen. He chose a middle path. He would send informal envoys to Earth to discuss the situation, but the safety protocols would remain in effect. It was a compromise that satisfied no one and solved nothing. On Earth, the government rejected the Council's envoys before they even arrived. The message was simple and clear. There would be no discussions, no negotiations, no compromises until the safety protocols were completely rescinded and a formal apology issued. Until then, humanity would continue its withdrawal from all Council activities. Earth was prepared to be self-sufficient. The question was whether the Council could say the same. As the second week began, more systems failed. Food shipments did not arrive on schedule. Power generation faltered on stations where human technicians had maintained fusion reactors. Scientific research projects stalled when human data analysts stopped processing results. The unraveling continued, not because Earth was attacking, but because humanity had simply stopped holding galactic civilization together. The Council had ridiculed Earth and passed laws to further control them. Now they were learning that those they had controlled had been the ones keeping everything running all along. The dependent had become essential, and the masters were discovering they did not know how to function without their servants. The Krill Empire had built its reputation on military might. For 3,000 years they had conquered 72 worlds and forced their populations into servitude. When the Council had formed, the Krill had been powerful enough to demand a seat at the central table. They maintained the largest fleet in known space, over 4,000 warships organized into fleets that patrolled their territory and intimidated their neighbors. To the Krill, Earth's withdrawal from Council activities was not a clever strategy but an insult that demanded violent response. Warlord Kryl Prime addressed his military council with contempt in his voice. These humans thought they could threaten the galactic order by withholding their services. They thought their little games with trade and maintenance would force the council to back down. The warlord proposed a simple solution: send a fleet to Earth, destroy their orbital defenses, and occupy their homeworld. Once humanity saw their cities burning, they would submit. Other species would learn what happened to those who defied council authority. The Krill assembled a battle group of 500 ships, nearly 1/8 of their entire fleet. It was massive overkill for attacking a single system, but the warlord wanted to send a message. Intelligence reports indicated Earth had perhaps 200 warships, all lightly armed and designed for defensive operations according to treaty restrictions. The Krill fleet could destroy them in hours and then bombard Earth's surface until the humans begged for mercy. Admiral Hyejin Choi watched the Krill fleet's approach on her tactical display. They were coming through the outer system, moving in standard formation toward the inner planets where Earth and its colonies waited. She had positioned her defensive fleet exactly where the Krill would expect to find it, between Mars and Jupiter, arranged in a traditional defensive sphere. 200 ships against 500. On paper, it looked like Earth was about to be crushed. Commander Daehyun Park stood on the bridge of the flagship, a ship called the Indomitable Will. He had been a diplomat for most of his career, but he had started his life as a military officer, and he understood warfare. He watched the Krill approach and felt no fear. Let them come, he thought. Let them discover what humanity had really been building, while the Council patted themselves on the back for keeping Earth under control. Tactical Officer. Yoonjinam sat at her station running final checks on the neural interface system. Every ship in the human fleet was connected through quantum-entangled communication nodes that allowed instant coordination. More than that, the ship's captains were linked through neural interfaces that let them think and react as one. Where the Krill fleet required minutes to relay orders and adjust tactics, the human fleet could respond in microseconds. It was not about being faster. It was about being perfectly synchronized. The battle began when the Krill fleet reached weapons range. Their capital ships opened fire with plasma cannons that could melt through conventional armor in seconds. The blasts streaked across space toward the human formation, hundreds of deadly shots that should have overwhelmed Earth's defenses. But the human ships moved before the Krill fired. The neural interface system had detected the minute power fluctuations that preceded weapon discharge, and every human ship adjusted position instantly. The plasma fire passed through empty space where targets had been a moment before. Krill commanders watched in confusion as their opening salvo missed completely. They adjusted aim and fired again. Again, the human ships moved with impossible precision, dodging attacks that should have been unavoidable. The Krill fleet tightened formation and increased fire rate, filling space with so much weaponry that nothing could evade it. That was when the human ships revealed their first real advantage. Dr. Minho Lee had spent 20 years developing gravity manipulation technology. The Council had researched it centuries ago but abandoned it as too unstable and dangerous. Human scientists had no such caution. Each human warship mounted gravity field generators that could create localized distortions in spacetime. When the Krill unleashed their massive barrage, the human ships activated their fields. Plasma fire curved away from its intended targets. bent by artificial gravity wells. Kinetic projectiles spiraled off course. Energy beams diffracted and dispersed harmlessly. The Krill warlord watched from his flagship in disbelief as his fleet's weapons proved completely ineffective. He ordered his ships to close distance and engage in direct combat. The Krill had powerful shields and heavy armor. In close quarters, they could ram the smaller human vessels and tear them apart. The fleet advanced 500 massive warships accelerating toward 200 smaller ones. Admiral Hyejin gave a single command through the neural link: engage. The human fleet split into 20 coordinated groups, each group moving with perfect synchronization. They did not flee from the advancing Krill. Instead, they accelerated toward them, diving into the enemy formation with reckless speed. But it was not reckless. Every movement had been calculated by thousands of tactical computers working in parallel, and executed by crews who thought as one. The human ships carried weapons the Council had never seen. Gravity lance projectors that created focused beams of distorted space-time, capable of crushing a ship from the inside out. Quantum destabilizers that disrupted the molecular bonds in enemy armor, causing ships to simply fall apart. Antimatter missiles guided by AI that were smarter than most living beings. And most devastating of all, singularity mines that created microscopic black holes for a fraction of a second, long enough to tear through shields and hull before evaporating. The battle lasted exactly 11 minutes. In that time, 500 Krill warships were reduced to debris. Some were torn apart by gravity weapons. Others collapsed inward as singularity mines detonated inside their hulls. A few managed to fire their weapons, but human shields absorbed the damage while AI-controlled countermeasures intercepted incoming fire. The Krill had numbers and experience and a reputation built over millennia. None of it mattered against technology they could not counter, and coordination they could not match. The warlord's flagship was the last ship remaining. Its shields had failed, its weapons were offline, and its crew was in shock. Admiral Hyejin sent a direct communication to the Krill leader. She informed him that his ship would not be destroyed. Instead, he would return to his empire and tell them what happened here. He would explain that Earth had shown restraint by limiting casualties to military targets. He would warn his people that if the Krill ever threatened humanity again, there would be no survivors to carry the message home. The warlord wanted to respond with defiance, but the words would not come. He had witnessed something that should not be possible. A young species restricted by treaty and dismissed as primitive had just annihilated the most powerful military force in the galaxy. He ordered his damaged flagship to retreat, and as it limped away from the battlefield, he knew everything had changed. Commander Daehyun made sure the entire battle was recorded from multiple angles. He uploaded the footage to the Galactic Network, making it available to every species in Council space. Within hours, billions of beings watched as the Krill fleet was destroyed with contemptuous ease. Daehyun included a message with the video. This, he said, was humanity being polite. This was restraint. Earth had no desire for war or conquest. But if the Council insisted on treating humans as threats that needed to be controlled, then Earth would show them what a real threat looked like. The reaction across the galaxy was immediate. Species that had mocked Earth's ultimatum fell silent. Military analysts tried to understand how human technology had advanced so far beyond Council standards. Politicians who had supported the safety protocols began quietly changing their positions. The math was simple and terrifying. If Earth could destroy the Krill fleet without losing a single ship, what could they do to the rest of the Council? On the planet Vrex Prime, the government called an emergency meeting. The Vrexians had been among the loudest voices demanding restrictions on Earth. Their ambassador had laughed when Jiwoo objected to the safety protocols. Now they watched the battle footage and understood their mistake. They drafted a message to Earth requesting immediate negotiations. They were not the only ones. Within 24 hours of the battle, 37 species sent similar requests. The council chamber remained in chaos. Veltharis tried to maintain order, but too many councilors were shouting at once. Some demanded immediate mobilization of all council forces to crush Earth before it was too late. Others insisted on negotiation and compromise. A few suggested that perhaps Earth had been right to object to the safety protocols, that maybe humanity deserved to be treated as equals after all. Councillor Thexnar stood and requested silence. When the chamber finally quieted, he spoke with a sadness in his voice that the translators struggled to convey. The council had made a terrible mistake, he said. They had judged humanity by their history instead of their potential. They had seen human cooperation as weakness instead of choice. They had believed their own superiority so completely that they never considered the possibility that these newcomers might surpass them. Now the galaxy faced a crisis of the council's own making, and the only way forward was to admit fault and seek peace. 3 weeks after Earth withdrew from the council, galactic civilization teetered on the edge of complete collapse. The communication network functioned at only 30% capacity, making coordination between distant worlds nearly impossible. Trade had dropped by 70% as shipping routes that relied on human logistics expertise fell apart. 12 worlds faced food shortages because agricultural technology developed by human scientists had been implemented without anyone learning how it actually worked. On at least 30 stations and colonies, life support systems were failing as equipment broke down and no one knew how to repair it properly. Civil unrest erupted on multiple worlds. On Kelf 9, mining workers rioted when their pay did not arrive due to banking system failures. On the Vrexian homeworld, protesters demanded their government fix the crisis by any means necessary. On Thek Station, species that had coexisted peacefully for decades turned on each other as resources became scarce and environmental controls continued to malfunction. The Council had maintained galactic peace for over 1,000 years, but now that peace was fracturing along with everything else, Council Prime Veltharis sat alone in his chamber, reviewing casualty reports. 73 people had died on Merdan Station when oxygen recycling failed. 200 had perished in riots on Kelf 9. The Krill Empire was in chaos after news of their fleet's destruction, with 3 regional governors declaring independence. The galaxy was coming apart, and Veltharis knew with certainty that the Council could not stop it. Only Earth could stop it, and Earth was not answering their calls. He made the decision he should have made 3 weeks ago. He composed a message to Earth's government, not an informal inquiry or a negotiation offer, but an unconditional surrender. The Council would rescind the safety protocols immediately. They would issue a formal apology to humanity. They would accept any terms Earth demanded. Pride no longer mattered. The survival of galactic civilization was at stake, and Veltharis had finally accepted that only humans could save it. President Ji-Yon Shin received the surrender message in her office in Geneva. She read it 3 times to make sure she understood correctly. The most powerful alliance in the galaxy was offering complete capitulation. Part of her wanted to feel triumphant, but mostly she felt tired. This crisis could have been avoided if the Council had simply treated humanity with basic respect. Instead, it had taken economic collapse and military humiliation to teach them that lesson. She consulted with her advisors and decided Earth would not simply accept the surrender. Humanity had been dismissed and controlled for 50 years, and a simple apology would not fix the structural problems in how galactic civilization operated. If this crisis was going to mean something, if all this suffering was going to lead to lasting change, then the entire system needed to be rebuilt from scratch. President Shin scheduled a broadcast to the entire galaxy. Every species, every world, every station would receive the message simultaneously. She stood before the cameras in her office, behind her a window showing Earth in all its beauty, and began to speak. She told the galaxy that humanity had not wanted this crisis. Earth had tried for 50 years to work within the Council system, to prove themselves worthy of respect through cooperation and contribution. The Council had responded with contempt and ever-increasing restrictions. She explained that Earth was prepared to restore their services and end the suffering that had spread across the galaxy. But there would be no return to the old system. The Council as it existed was broken, built on assumptions of hierarchy and superiority that served only to maintain the power of established species while suppressing the potential of others. Any new galactic organization needed to be founded on different principles: genuine equality, mutual respect, and recognition that value comes from contribution rather than age or military strength. President Shin laid out Earth's terms for rejoining galactic civilization. First, all previous treaties that specifically restricted Earth would be voided. Human sovereignty over Sol System and all human colonies would be absolute and non-negotiable. No Council observers, no oversight committees, No limitations on human military or economic development. Second, any future agreements between humanity and other species would be negotiated individually and bilaterally, not imposed by Council majority vote. Earth would choose its own partners and allies based on mutual benefit. Third, and most importantly, the Council structure itself needed to be reformed. The current system allowed established powers to dominate newcomers through voting blocks and procedural rules. Any new galactic organization needed to ensure that every member species had genuine voice and agency, not just theoretical representation. Earth would help design this new structure, but only if other species were willing to give up some of their traditional privileges. The reaction was swift and divided. Species that were suffering most from the crisis immediately signaled their acceptance of Earth's terms. The Thex government agreed to everything without negotiation, desperate to get human engineers back to work saving their failing stations. The Myrdan leaders welcomed the proposed reforms, having lost faith in the Council's ability to protect them. Within 48 hours, 53 species had formally accepted bilateral treaties with Earth on human terms, but many others resisted. The Vrexians objected to giving up their Council voting privileges. The Mordak insisted that Earth was taking advantage of a temporary crisis to extract permanent concessions. Several military powers, shaken by the Krill defeat, but not yet willing to accept Earth's dominance, argued that the galaxy should wait out the crisis rather than surrender to human demands. Ambassador Jiwoo Kim returned to the Council chamber, but this time she came not as a supplicant, but as an equal negotiating from a position of strength. She met with individual delegations, explaining Earth's position clearly and without compromise. Humanity was not trying to dominate the galaxy or replace the Council with human authority. They simply wanted what should have been offered from the beginning, recognition as equals with the freedom to chart their own course. She told Counselor Thexnar that Earth remembered those who had shown respect. The Thex had been among the first to call for negotiations rather than confrontation. When the new galactic organization formed, humans would remember their friends, but Earth would also remember those who had laughed at their humiliation, who had voted for the safety protocols, who had mocked the idea that humanity deserved better treatment. Dr. Minho Lee began releasing selected information about the technological advances Earth had achieved. Not complete specifications or detailed schematics, but enough to demonstrate the scope of human innovation. The medical breakthroughs that could extend lifespans by decades. The energy generation systems that were twice as efficient as anything currently in use. The materials science discoveries that enabled construction techniques the Council thought impossible. Agricultural methods that could feed billions on worlds previously considered too harsh for settlement. The message was clear. Earth had these capabilities and was willing to share them, but only with genuine partners. Species that wanted access to human technology would need to offer something valuable in return, and treat humans with the respect due to equals. The days of humanity giving away their innovations for free while being treated as primitive children were over. Veltharis called a final session of the Council in its old form. He stood before the assembled delegates and spoke with a weariness that made his ancient age apparent. The Council had failed, he said. It had failed to recognize when a new member species was being treated unjustly. It had failed to adapt to changing circumstances. It had failed to see that the galaxy was evolving, and that old assumptions about power and hierarchy no longer applied. The Council could either reform itself or become irrelevant as species negotiated directly with Earth and abandoned the central authority. The vote was not about accepting Earth-specific terms, but about whether to dissolve the Council entirely and start over. After hours of debate, the measure passed by a narrow margin. The Galactic Council that had governed for over 1,000 years formally voted itself out of existence. In its place, representatives agreed to form a new organization based on principles of sovereign equality and voluntary cooperation. It would take years to work out all the details, but the fundamental structure of galactic civilization had changed forever. Human engineers returned to their positions across the galaxy, but now they were consultants rather than employees, partners rather than servants. Human merchants resumed trade operations, but now they negotiated from equal footing with alien counterparts. Human scientists shared their research, but now they received proper credit and compensation. Slowly, the systems that had failed began to function again. The crisis eased as human expertise was reapplied to critical infrastructure. Admiral Hyejin Choi stood down the hidden fleet from alert status, but did not send it back into concealment. Earth's military capabilities were now public knowledge, and the Admiral saw no reason to pretend otherwise. The ships took up defensive positions around Sol system and human colonies, a visible reminder that Earth could defend its interests if necessary.